Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Now, Temi is a software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. And each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry, and today we're lucky enough to have an amazing guest joining us, Prateek Sanyal, CTO at Retailogists. Hello, Prateek. How are you doing today?
Hi, Barry. Great. I'm really excited to be here. Haven't done a lot of podcasts in the past.
Hope we can measure up to that high caliber of historical podcasts that we've had. Okay, so for those people who don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company that you work at?
Yeah, sure. So you already gave them my name, which is great. So I'll start after that. I've been living and working in Canada for almost all of my adult life. Prior to that, I was, from India originally. Most of my career, I worked as a data engineer or something adjacent to that, like software engineering, but with a data-heavy focus or MLOps. So I've been a staff data engineer and tech lead at Shopify. I've been a senior MLOps engineer at Unity and a few other leadership roles in tech companies. In 2024, I decided that I had had enough of my corporate career and I wanted to try something new. So I basically quit without a plan from my job at the time and ended up starting my own consulting business in data platform engineering and FinOps, which is cost optimization for cloud services. And Retailogists was actually one of my clients. I was working for them as a fractional data architect slash advisor. I guess they loved working with me. I loved working with them. So we agreed on a merger eventually. And Fractal Point, my company joined Retailogists. And ever since then, I've been part of Retailogists. And outside of this, in my free time, I play a lot of games, maybe too much for my own health. And I used to play a lot of chess when I was younger. I still love it, but I don't play as much anymore. And I'm a huge history nerd, if that ever comes up.
Oh, yeah, very good. Quitting your job and not having a plan, that's quite... Some people might say foolish, some people might say brave. How would you position that?
I don't think there's those two are mutually exclusive categories, right? So like often you have to be foolish and brave at the same time. Yeah, it's definitely both those things. I wanted to do something. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I tried a bunch of little things here and there. I tried a few projects. I also tried to build a product with a co-founder that didn't really get very far, but it was an interesting learning experience. And I think it was just time for me in my life to see so fundamentally, I wanted to understand what is the real value that I can, if I had to say in a year, this is how much money I'm generating. You can't really do that in big tech because in big tech you get paid a certain amount, and sometimes that it's not well correlated with the value you're bringing. So you can start to develop this perpetual imposter syndrome of, okay, am I really worth the amount of money I'm getting paid? But as a consultant, you're going to find out. So this was one of the things I wanted to try and see, can I justify the type of salaries that I was asking for a year ago if I had to just make this money on my own?
Spoiler, you were.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you always a leader? Was that something that you've always been good at?
That's also a hard question because it would require me to be very self-aware to answer that question accurately. I think as a kid, I tried to be a leader a lot, but part of that was just driven by ego, right? It's not it's just, you want to boss around your friends sometimes. I think when I really became a good leader is after I failed at leadership a little bit, without mentioning any names, but the first time I became a tech lead, I think I made many of the classic mistakes that you make when you're a first-time tech lead. And I learned a lot from it. It was I'm still good at my job, but in some of the soft skills, I think I'd been properly humbled, and from there, I think I just grew a lot.
And were there any particularly difficult experiences that helped shape and build the kind of person that you are today? And have those skills been used to apply to Retailogists?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing that I learned in my first run at being a tech lead was that you cannot use, I'm going to speak very frankly with you because I guess that's the point. You cannot use your title or your rank in a company to get things done or get people to respect you. It just doesn't work, right? Especially in the tech industry, I find that engineers always have invisible self-organizing hierarchies. I read this in a blog somewhere. I don't remember the name, so I'm not trying to steal credit from any author. But like essentially what happens often in tech teams is that like, you might have someone assigned as a tech lead, as a manager, director, or whatever. But if that person is not consistently making great decisions, the engineers will secretly self-organize. There's an underlying hierarchy of like competence and trustworthiness that only the engineering team is kind of aware of, and they really will defer to the judgment of the people who they trust more than the people who are in ranks of seniority. So one of my great learnings from very early on was that don't hide behind a title.
Mm.
And so the way I try to lead my team now is from a position of humility, because there's a lot of times there'll be people in my team who are far more experienced or skilled at a certain thing that they're working on. And I try my best to be cognizant of it, not get in people's way, and be an enabler of people to do the best work they can. Obviously, in some cases, I might actually be the domain expert in a certain subject, but the key is to understand when you're not, and be humble about it, I think.
So, just so people understand what Retailogists is, could you tell us a little bit about what the company does and who it's built for?
Sure. So, Retailogists basically started off as a sort of consulting partner, like a growth partner for retail businesses. One of our founders is a very experienced executive and in the retail space, and he kind of identified this problem that either, if you had to solve a problem as a retailer, either you'd hire consultants who have MBAs and make amazing slide decks, but can't actually solve the problems, or you hire agencies to do the dev work and they don't have any business acumen. They don't understand how to approach business problems. They can only approach technology problems. So the DNA of Retailogists is to basically marry these two sides. So our engineers, for example, they always have like commercial goals tied to their objectives. So they don't have any outcome which is like a purely technical goal. And our operational folks, the people who are sort of more business savvy, they're encouraged to really understand the tech side. So by binding these two things into our very DNA, we're able to like essentially help companies solve end-to-end problems. And after a couple of years of doing this, we have started building our own products as well. These have kind of emerged organically from the needs identified by our clients. I can tell you more about whichever side of this you want to hear about.
I'm happy to hear whatever you want to share with us. I mean, one of the things that comes up a lot in these discussions is AI. I
Yeah.
don't know, like if you want to talk about that now, because that's one of the key focuses that we get on it's almost like every single business need. There's some AI focus in it. Like, how are business needs? How is business changing with AI?
The honest answer is nobody knows for sure, right? Like it's so new and it's so raw. Um, I could speak a little bit about my domain, which is data engineering, and kind of tell you what I'm seeing as like the changes in the industry. So, one of the things about being an engineer is that you have to be at the frontier of this movement, right? Because if you're not there, like somebody else will be, and you'll fall behind, right? Especially as a startup, like our entire org is like around 50 people, give or take. So it's really important that we're kind of cutting edge when it comes to AI adoption to whatever extent possible. So we take a lot of chances with AI, and there's a couple of like interesting observations that I could share with you. So one of the things that's changing is, prior to the AI driven software and data engineering age, the thing that cost the most was writing code, like executing building a pipeline, whatever it is. As a result, two things happened. First of all, um, planning became super important. And secondly, third-party tooling that offers like no-code pathways became very valuable, right? AI has disrupted both these things quite significantly.
Mhm.
So in the data engineering space, one thing that I'm starting to see becoming less and less relevant is your ability to make a really good plan before you start. This is not so much true for big tech yet, because when you're talking about like massive scales of data, like small decisions have a huge cost impact. But like when you're talking about like small to mid-sized businesses, this is not so much the case anymore. So, when we look at schema modeling, for example, right? So like, let's say you're building a data warehouse because you want to do some analytics, some reporting. I don't know how technical the audience is. Can I go into a bit of tech or?
Go into it. Yeah, go into it.
Yeah. Okay. So like with schema modeling, like the traditional education has always been to like really think about your schema model. Like you might have a star schema, a snowflake schema, etc. Right? So you spend a lot of time front loading the effort to plan a data warehouse before you start building it. With the AI age, there's two ways in which this is changing very rapidly. First of all, as I mentioned, it's very easy to like redo the work if required, right? So like there's there's less there's less of an incentive to front load it if you can just do it 5 times over with very little cost, just the tokens you consume. The second thing that's really interesting is that if the consumer of your data is also going to be AI rather than a human, the one who's writing the queries, then you don't necessarily want to think about modeling schemas in a way that's human readable, which has always been a priority in the past. So, like, if you look at something like a star schema where you have like fact and dimension tables, I won't go too deep into this because it's like nerdy data engineering stuff. But like, it's for those who know, a lot of this stuff was done in a way that like it's performant, yes, but also it's easy for the data engineer or an analytics engineer to write a query on top of that, right? But I think AI has shifted this quite a bit. So if I'm using AI to write queries, I don't need to think about modeling as deeply as before, especially because human intuition is not a factor anymore. And then the really, really interesting stuff that's coming up is on the business intelligence layer, where when you have dashboards, um, dashboards are always designed for human consumption,
Yeah.
right? So like the way you visualize data, the way you build charts and stuff. The idea is like how quickly can I get a human to an insight that they can trust? So give them enough data under the hood for the confidence on that insight. But really, it's the human that will consume it. Again, with AI, this is changing very rapidly. So I think BI is the most up in the air. So like if you're like, let's say you have like dashboard set up with Power BI, Metabase, Tableau, whatever it is, there is a case to be made. It's not 100% yet, but there's a case to be made that something like Claude or like some other relevant AI tool, OpenAI, ChatGPT, could essentially generate answers to your analytics questions on the fly very accurately if it has the right set of context and prompts. And at that point, why do you even need a dashboard? Right. So this is going to be a very, very interesting subject. But I'll stop here because there's so much depth I could keep going
Yeah,
on.
yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, time is of the limit. So, Prateek, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Thank you so much for giving us that somewhat holistic view. In terms of like future proofing, like how do we go about future proofing data, especially on the platform, and what does it look like?
Future proofing. So you're talking about the data platforms themselves,
Yes,
or
data platforms
okay,
themselves. Yeah.
yeah. So I think the key thing, the key insight I would sort of want to propagate is don't just build systems that are designed for human consumption, right? So this is both on the analytics layer where we talked about the BI tools, but also on the data engineering layer. Like everything you're building now, you have to think in a very different way. You'll have to think about like in future, um, a lot of the work is going to be done by agents, and most likely there will be some executive decisions that will be taken by humans for a long time to come. But to arrive at those decisions, these humans will talk to a chatbot and get the answers they're looking for. You really want to start thinking about designing systems that are chatbot friendly. So
Mm.
like, what does this mean in practice, right? I don't want to use the word chatbot; it's a very primitive word actually, but like LLMs, right?
Yeah.
Um, so in practice, let's look at what this would mean, right? So if let's say you are using a BI tool that is like really entrenched in your org, and you've put a lot of the sort of heavy query logic, the stuff that's like your semantic layer, let's say, like that's like sort of defining the business layer. You've put that in your BI tool. This is something that people do often with Power BI, for example. Now, if you want your AI to be able to get those same insights, your only option is to connect it to the BI tool. This is you're just adding a bunch of cost for yourself because firstly the BI tools needs to have a really good API and you're gonna have to pay for the usage of that API, right? A much better approach would be if the AI could connect directly to your data warehouse or data lake. And when you do this, you want to make sure that your semantic layer isn't living on the BI tool. So I like without getting too deep into the technicals, what I'm trying to say here is like all the entire industry has been set up in a way that makes it easy for humans to consume and read the data. And we have to start thinking about flipping this on its head now, which is a real like mind-bending paradigm, even for professionals who have built a career out of like building stuff that's human-friendly, human readable. Uh, this is a huge paradigm shift that's coming up.
In terms of like innovation versus stability, like do you ever have a situation where you think like, oh, I'd really like to start doing this particular thing, but then actually maybe because of issues of stability you don't do it? I suppose the question I'm asking, are you a bit of a daydreamer? Are there things that you would really love to put into the system, but just for practicality purposes you can't?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm very practical by nature. So this has been sort of my one of my idiosyncrasies, you could say, throughout my career. Like I'll be ambitious in terms of like taking a risk with AI or something like that. But for me, like every decision I make is practical. So and for like younger engineers listening to this podcast, I think this is an important observation of mine from my own career is that in order to really like maximize how far you go in this industry, like you really do want to be very practical about the decisions that you make and not be dogmatic. But yeah, so to answer your specific question about like things that I'd want to put in if I had like free reign and no
Yeah.
concern for practicality, um you know what, my brain just doesn't work like that. I'm trying really hard to rewire it, but I can't. Everything I think about is like based on some ground commercial reality, so it's hard.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect. I think you've kind of answered
Yeah.
your own question the way the answer is no, you think
Yeah.
very practically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're constrained by that. But that's what makes you a success in some ways, right? Um, you've obviously had a lot of experience with data. When you have consumers, clients, or other parties, do you see kind of the same mistakes being made again and again? Maybe in terms of the application, maybe in terms of the kind of metrics that they're looking at, or the way that they use certain things. Are there any key themes that seem to reappear time and time again?
100%.
Okay, good.
100%. Good question. Yeah. So, you know what? Let's put off our engineer hat for a second, put on
Okay.
our business hat. Okay. So, every single data project that I've seen fail has been a flavor of the same sort of core systematic issues. So, what a business will often do is build, like they'll hire a data team and sort of give them a lot of autonomy, which is great. But now this data team is like its own organism, and it has a need to create cool stuff, right? So it's going to go in and start building like crazy technology without really clearly defining the business need, right? And one of the problems is that sometimes like real practical like problems in business, the solutions are really, really simple. And engineers hate that. Most engineers don't want a simple solution to anything, right? So like you as a business, for example, like I've had situations where like, a business is not able to properly report their P&L. Like they don't have enough visibility into their own analytics to even do basic accounting, and they start like jumping into like a data science, like a machine learning problem, and they want forecasting, they want predictive analytics, right? So they'll hire the best people they can find, and these people inevitably will build cool shit, but they've missed the fundamentals, right? So like generally, if I like, let's say if I'm running a business today and I want to build some kind of a data driven approach to my business, the first thing I would do is ask like, what are the really simple problems to solve? And then like if I do hire a data team, I would really concretely tie them to the commercial outcomes that they're driving for, right? So like you might start by saying, okay, layer one, I want like proper financial reporting or whatever it is. Maybe layer two, I want a funnel of like users coming into my website, the kind of bread and butter of like a business for it to run properly. Make sure that anything that's being built is really servicing this, right? From there, you start to like expand, add more layers to the cake, basically, right? So like from there, you might have like some analytics that are more sophisticated, right? But you really don't ever want a situation where you build before you've thought about like what is the problem you're solving. And another manifestation of this is you don't want a situation where stuff's being built but not used. So if you have like a dashboard or something that's sitting around, a data engineer's built it or whatever, you really want to track as an executive, you want to track the usage of every dashboard that you're powering with your team. If you find that like a large majority of your dashboards aren't being used at all, which happens more often than you think, there's a systemic issue in the way you've structured your team, right? It means you're building a bunch of bloatware, right? So then you really want to go back into your data team and be like, okay, why did we build this dashboard? Who asked for it? Why is it still around? There's usually one of two outcomes there. Either the team that asks for it doesn't need it anymore, whatever. It's like an orphaned dashboard essentially. The other outcome is that it was built for a very good reason, but for whatever reason, after it was built, nobody adopted it. They're still sticking to their Google Sheets or whatever because change is hard, especially for people who are not engineers. Like I could build the fanciest dashboard, but if you've been using an Excel sheet to solve your problem for the last 10 years, you're not going to suddenly start using mine, right? So this cycle of like making sure that stuff actually gets used at the end of execution is missing in most data projects, and it's also tied to the fact that like the project's outcome is not closely bound to the commercial outcome that we were discussing, right? These are the two problems I see as like chronic issues in every failing data project. It's like you haven't thought about exactly what you want the data team to do. When they do it, you haven't followed through enough to make sure your team's actually adopting the solution they've built.
Forgive me if it seems like a stupid question. It just crossed my mind. Like you have access to all this data. When you're looking at this data, is it basically you just organizing and recording it, or are you actually like looking at it and using it, perhaps, for example, like to ascertain or predict like consumer behavior or predict any future patterns coming up that maybe if you're just recording the data, you won't necessarily recognize?
You want to approach this backwards. Like you want to start by saying, what am I looking for? Yeah, that's the fundamental, the crux of what I'm trying to say is like, if like let's say you're like running a retail business, right? You have an online store, you have a physical store, whatever. Maybe the most important question for you is like, what is my profit margin or what is my conversion rate or something like that, right? I don't know what is your North Star metric. Like typically you start at revenue and then you work your way backwards from there. You say, okay, I'm seeing a revenue lift or a decline. If you can't report that, start there, right? Like once you can report that, then you want to think about like, okay, what are the other variables that are affecting this, right? So let's say, you might say something like, okay, there's periods where my traffic is really high, conversion rates are really low. We have a tool called Avia that's really good at doing this. It's basically like a physical device with a Shopify app that we install in our client stores, and it tracks demographic insights, like anonymized demographic insights about who's coming through, who's leaving. And then we correlate that with like the point of sale data, like the transactions when you actually tap your credit card. So we're able to say something like, between 2 and 3 p.m., you had like 200 people come through, but only 50 of them made a purchase. So your conversion rate is 25%, right? This is a very interesting metric. And what we'll do is we'll tie this into something like, you had in periods where you have high traffic, you have low conversion, where you have, or something like that, and then find some interesting insights from there. But really, the starting point always has to be the insight, not the data, right? I think the idea that you can start with a bunch of good data and then find insights, it's like, in theory, it just never happens.
Unfortunately, we are coming towards the end of the podcast, Prateek. But one more question for you just before we go. If someone's watching this now, they're wanting to set up their own business, wanting to be like an entrepreneur themselves, and you having been through your journey, what piece of advice would you give to them right now?
Like the thing about entrepreneurship is you really have to ask yourself why you're doing it. A lot of people think that it's an easy way to get rich because they've watched too many social media influencers. It's not. It's absolutely not. Like if you're an engineer and you want to get rich fast, go work in big tech, right? There's just like that's the fastest way, probably most low risk. Okay, I'm going to be very frank here, right? So with entrepreneurs, I've seen three models that succeed. There's people who are chasing something, right? This could be like they have like a status goal or something. It's like an ego-driven thing. These people are successful for a while until they get what they want, then they kind of fizzle out, right? Then there's people who are running away from something. Like maybe they have like a lot of baggage in their head and they want to keep themselves distracted, so they turn into workaholics. Again, leads to burnout, right? But you will have some early success. The people who I find are actually long-term successful as entrepreneurs and fulfilled with it are people who have an obsession with a problem, right? So like you start with like, I really, really, really want to solve this problem. So one of my obsessions is that I want to bring the level of like analytics and insights that, let's say, I've seen in the gaming industry or the ad tech industry into the retail industry. Because while ecom has pretty good analytics now through like Shopify, Wix, etc., in physical retail, the state of analytics is still really, really primitive. So for me, this is like, it's turned into an obsession that I want to like close that gap, right? I find that if you have this, the rest of the journey becomes easier because you don't really mind having to like work a weekend or something, because you'll have to at some point as an entrepreneur. You're doing it for a reason that won't expire once you hit some level of success.
So I think that's my entrepreneurial dreams come to an end because I don't fall into either of those three categories. But I
Yeah.
appreciate your frankness, Prateek. Listen, I just want to thank you so much again for talking with me today. I'd love to talk to you more, but we are out of time. But it was an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I wish you and your team all the best, Barry.